Okay, so we're with Dr. Ryan Winters, and you may remember we spoke to him last year. He'd been in Ukraine, he'd been working with a team from the United States and Australia doing surgery in Ukraine at the Okhmedit Hospital, which had then later been tragically bombed. And when we spoke to him, he mentioned that he was going to go back to Ukraine in October.
Yeah.
So so it's now February, and we're getting to catch up with him. So hi, Ryan. It's good to talk to you again.
Hello. It's good to speak to you again too.
So I just wanted to ask you, given what happened the last time we spoke about where you'd been working in Ukraine, what motivated you to return despite, the risks?
Well, I think there's always a bit of uncertainty in any sort of a conflict zone, and I think it is a very individualized decision for those of us who have that sort of privilege to be able to say yes or no, I won't go, as opposed to the people who are living with that every day. And I'm certainly in no way am trying to make light of that or to um, or to I'm not quite sure how to put it, but I'm not trying to downplay the very very real dangers that are there, or to sort of throw that in the face of anybody who is, of all the people who are actively trying to get out of this. I don't want to seem somehow ungrateful and running towards it, and that's not the case. It is very much a matter of just supporting those people that we have worked with now over years of working through these unfortunate situations, that each person by person who works in these organizations, and myself included, sort of decide where our comfort level with that degree of uncertainty and potential danger lies. And once that decision's made, then it's very much a collaborative thing with the people who are there. And so, I think ultimately there were genuinely some really scary sort of attacks that had happened from the Russians on both Kiev in particular, but also in Lviv and many other places, certainly in the east. But with those colleagues that I've worked with who kind of came out of it, the work is still there, and supporting those people and those projects that we've developed over the past couple of years. And it just sort of felt like it was good to be able to continue to do my part.
That's great, and I'm sure they really, really appreciated it. So, when you went back there, did you notice any significant changes in both the healthcare landscape and the people that you mentioned that you've been working with?
I think honestly, because so many of the people that I work with are the active duty military physicians and nurses and other healthcare workers, no, for them it's just another day, sort of, kind of sadly. So no, there really was not a whole lot of difference there. In sort of like in a harder to describe way, because this time going back, we just went to Lviv. We didn't go to back to Kiev, and that largely was for security reasons. When we talked with, sort of with the sponsoring NGOs that we work with on the Ukrainian side, just like the feel in Lviv was different. Like I feel like the first one or two times I've been there, you kind of had to look harder to, or really pay more attention to realize that it was sort of a conflict zone. Like life was very normal. I think it was very much a point of pride.
Yeah.
It was a little more obvious this time around that the curfew was earlier. The people were like, just sort of the energy and feeling was a little more tense.
Yeah. Yes, I can only imagine, even just talking to some of our partners just on Zoom calls, you can see, there's a difference in their faces, and yeah, it's tough. So, are you able to share with us a particular case or patient story from this visit that particularly impacted you, or that you're able to share with us?
Well, and the one that I still think about pretty routinely is actually quite a heartbreaking one. So there was a man who was in his, I believe, late 50s, and who I believe was a teacher in civilian life. And I'm not sure if he was still teaching, he was retired before he was conscripted into the Ukrainian, after Ukraine had been invaded. I think it was either 12 months or 14 months before I met him. He had an extremely serious injury, a blast injury. Basically had a significant neck wound, lost a big part of his face, ultimately had a carotid artery injury, so basically almost died on the battlefield. And through the sort of very heroic efforts of the Ukrainian surgeons that were there, is alive.
Mm.
Doesn't have a whole lot of family and sort of lives on his own, was bound in a wheelchair, and with the extent of his injuries, really couldn't close his mouth properly, wasn't really able to feed himself, and was really struggling with socially and obviously emotionally. And so we sort of had a very long heart-to-heart discussion with him about, there's a chance that we could try to rebuild his jaw, at least to get him to be able to eat on his own again. Understanding that was very, very risky due to his other injuries. And he's like, you know what, I'm really honestly willing to try anything. I'm at the end of my rope. So with him and the family that we had, we sort of decided to proceed. And unfortunately, when we put him to sleep, he kind of coded on the table and almost didn't survive the anesthetic before we could even get started. And so we were able to resuscitate him and work him back up. But unfortunately, after all that, it's just this sort of just huge emotional gut wrench, I think, for all of us involved. That, I think the whole team was at least on board with really trying to maybe give everyone his last hurrah. It just wasn't in the cards, and so really just turned our attention more to focusing and seeing through Rudy and the other organizations what we can do in terms of social services to really help his life in that way. But that was hard. That was a rough one.
Wow, that sounds very emotionally challenging. And I guess that leads to the next question, which was, how did you and the rest of the team and even your Ukrainian colleagues, what were some of the things you did to maintain morale and be able to, focus on your work despite those sort of really emotionally draining moments?
I think it is because it is sort of such a core group among the Ukrainians who've gotten to know each other a bit better. They're like those old friendships are fun. So there's it at some level it is just kind of hanging out with your mates during the day, even though you're at work, and that helps a lot. And I think for all of us. But then really there are a lot of team activities, both sort of before and after the workday, whenever that is, and whether it's just going for meals or going for walks around town when we're allowed to, and things like that. That really is has become just such a key part of it.
It sounds to me, just hearing you talk, it sounds to me like a big part of what you do is not just your technical surgical skills. Obviously, they're quite amazing, and you contribute a lot in that regard, obviously, and are able to teach Ukrainian surgeons many great skills as well. But it sounds to me like a big part of what you also contribute is that continuity, the fact that you have actually been able to return a few times and build some relationships and be a part of a team and make them feel supported and not alone. Is
I
that a fair
think that,
comment?
yeah, I think so. And I think that's a hugely important part of it, that even as, for basically all of us from the American and Australian and Canadian side of the team, this is our first go at doing this too. So I think we're learning kind of how crucial that was to the overall success of it. Because as you said, it is one thing to go in and show any given surgical technique to someone, but these are very, very complicated cases, even for the most experienced surgeons. And then to just sort of leave and have them be like, okay, well, you're on your own. We showed you how to do it. Go try. That's a very different feeling from everybody's standpoint, as opposed to we're always on the other end of that phone and we're going to see you again in a month or 3 months. And really that sort of mentorship and building those skills, I think, is why it has been as successful as it has been. And that's something that I certainly have taken away from just how important that really is. So.
Yeah. That's great, and that's actually really good to think about and for us to know, and for people who are listening who might be interested in getting involved in this work, because I would like to encourage more people to come and contribute their skills, and not just surgeons in different
Yeah.
specialties. And like you say, I really would love people who are maybe in a position where they could consider establishing relationships and sort of ongoing things. And even like you said, it doesn't all have to be, going to Ukraine every month, but it's, we can do so much stuff like this as well, the follow up.
Sure.
Yeah. So we had a Ukrainian neurosurgeon who came and had some upskilling in Australia that we were able to help organise with some generous sponsorship from one of the surgeons here.
That's great.
And he's just said how, it's just been so incredible for him just knowing that all these guys have just insisted that, he can pick up the phone anytime and ask questions and get their support. So,
and one thing I think, again, from our standpoint, as we were talking about the expat group who went on this last trip when the security situation had sort of heated up a bit again. One thing that I don't think, well, I certainly had not thought of, and I don't think anybody else that I talked to on our side, was the two of the Ukrainian surgeons are like this actually, like, symbolically on their end, it was such a morale boost for them that it was like we felt like we weren't forgotten.
Yeah. That
there's competing atrocities and ridiculous election results and everything else that the rest of the world has other things to think about, and I feel like it seemed like it was very easy that they could have felt like that their struggle is not in the forefront of people's minds in the way that it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 2014 when Crimea was annexed. It's been a long time, unfortunately, and I had not thought of it in those terms, and I was like, wow, okay, well that's something else to really consider.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just for those who maybe not really familiar with, operating or operating anywhere, let alone in a war zone, can you maybe give us a little bit of a feel for what are some of the unique challenges and difficulties that are operating in a country that is in a conflict compared to, say, operating in Melbourne or Sydney?
Well, I think certainly the major reconstructive operations and things like that I'm doing, it's honestly not that dramatically different than doing it in sort of a peacetime country, just because those aren't operations that are taken there, that are undertaken in a frontline hospital or anything like that. And so if you were to ask even a trauma surgeon from like Liverpool, one of the busy centers here in Australia, versus working in Dnipro or Donetsk or something, there are really significant differences. When you're talking about sort of long-term and reconstructive surgery, technically and institutionally, I mean, apart from things like power outages and the curfews, we have to be very, very careful about planning when we can't start the operation too late, because if we're going to go past midnight, then everyone's stuck at the hospital. So, little logistical things like that we obviously don't have to do. Yeah. But otherwise, because we have that, these are elective and planned procedures many sort of months even in advance, we can arrange scans. It may not be as expeditious or easy to do so, but those facilities are available in Ukraine. So if with enough notice, we can get CT scans, we can get whatever supplies we need. Things just take longer. Yeah. And it may not be sort of exactly the brand or the type, but something is functional that will work. But I think it is those those sort of more logistical things that you don't think about. I mean, barring some sort of natural disaster, I don't have to worry about losing power at John Hunter Hospital, whereas that could very much happen in Lviv. Or, we definitely made plans not only with the Ukrainian teams, but with the anesthetics teams in the hospital of, well, if there is a missile strike, if that really does happen and we have to go to the bomb shelter and there's a patient on the table, who's going, who's staying, which teams. And so just recognizing that those, as sort of out of left field as that sounds, that is something that we really do have to think about. And just as long as we have a plan for it and everyone's involved, and that's fine. Along those same lines, really the first time when I went to do these operations 2 years ago now, we're working with our anesthetics teams that have just come back from the front lines, so literally like battlefield surgeons. And so anytime the patient's blood pressure would get a little soft, you look over and they're transfusing in blood and you're like, okay, no, wait, we don't have to do that. You can use some presses. Well, we have saline, you don't do a whole blood transfusion. It's okay. We'll deal with a systolic of 100. So it's okay. So, but those things, that was their reaction, because that's what causes low blood pressure where they came from a week before. And we're looking over like, oh, no, okay, no, wait, don't do that. And that was not something that we had thought of.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah, wow. Yeah, I didn't think of that. So, um, you mentioned that you had sort of most of the things that you needed, and I guess as you said, you're in a bigger centre, and you're in the West and near the European Union, and plenty of supplies coming in from there. Um, what did you notice, or like even perhaps people you were talking to had come from other areas? Was anybody talking about sort of particular supplies or equipment or particular expertise that they were really in need of and looking for?
yeah, so we benefited a lot in terms of having the equipment and things that we need because we can plan so far in advance.
Okay.
So we all knew what to bring, and the surgeons knew which things they liked and what suture they wanted and what plates and those things.
Yeah.
So in that, the sort of expat team was very self-sufficient for those operations. Well, we all sort of brought as many other supplies as we could, and there was sort of we just asked the hospitals we were at in terms of a wish list. Sutures for orthopedic surgery. As you can imagine, there's a lot of limb and orthopedic injuries. Anything for the muscle and tendon reattachment type sutures, those were very, very much needed. Some of the microvascular clamps and microvascular instruments that they didn't have that we were able to source, at least some of that we can, even if we weren't going to use them, this was stuff that we need that would get used in that hospital that they had asked for. Some of the anesthetic supplies, most of the disposable supplies they at least had some of, but even things just like endotracheal tubes in more sizes, the most common sizes get used, and even reusing them, the balloons wear out after a few times since they're not technically meant to be reused. So size 6, 7, 8 endotracheal tubes, just those common consumables that they can get them, but not as easily. Something that we might be able to get in 2 days in Newcastle might take 2 months in Ukraine. Even if you can get it, it just means that somebody has to ship it to Poland and then somebody has to drive and get it and bring it back, or from Romania or wherever. So it can't be shipped directly, and it's very expensive.
Mm.
And so being able to bring it in with us, and certainly from the front lines, I think that that's even more the case, and that it does tend to be a lot of those frequently used disposable supplies that they'd really wanted. But I remember the first time that we came, we brought portable pulse oximeters, or something that they said would have been very, very useful. And we brought a few of those. Because we're at a major referral hospital, they started with sort of a lot there. So I think in terms of the non-consumable things, they kind of had a lot of the hardware, and so it's just the stuff that you use a lot of. Whereas I think in hospitals that were more heavily damaged or anything like that, you might be really starting from like more of a field hospital and need to find everything.
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you what lessons you think you've learned from this experience of, going back and forth to Ukraine that you'd like to share with other medical professionals. And we have touched on a couple of those, that about the commitment and the relationship and that. Is there anything else that you would like to share with medical professionals who might be thinking of getting involved?
yeah, I think the big one is just the value from all sides of sort of those building those relationships, and that it's much more beneficial for everyone. But I think also, for me personally, as well as on the other side, let alone in terms of patient continuity and sort of systems things. That if you have the ability, as opposed to trying to go to as many different places as possible, but to actually sort of develop something a bit longer term in any one location, I think that is pretty profoundly impactful, I think, for everyone in that way. Also, I think the biggest thing is it's one of the other big things would be just to not be afraid to try it. If you have an interest, I think that's sort of the biggest hurdle, is be like, okay, well, this is way outside of my comfort zone for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then to be like, oh, well, Ukraine, well, it's a war zone. Well, that's kind of crazy. But, unless you really actively try to hurt yourself, like, you're not going to get into a position that you really shouldn't be. If you're trying to go there to work in a hospital, like, someone will stop you before you can do something colossally stupid. And so, as I sort of mentioned before, like, everyone has to decide where that point of risk is in terms of what uncertainty you're willing to accept, because it is, obviously, it's much much more risky just objectively than it is going to most parts of Melbourne. But maybe not. I guess it depends what you're doing there.
That's right.
But the difference is you've got a whole lot more people looking out for you for that very same reason.
Yeah.
And so if that's the only thing that's stopping you from going, I think it is really worth some reaching out to some other people, yourself and myself. I'm happy to talk to anyone from these NGOs to be like, well, what is it really like? Did you ever feel unsafe? And to try to assuage some of those, because if that's really the only thing you're worried about, I think you may be missing out on a pretty wonderful sort of life and professional experience and the ability to contribute in a way that is meaningful for everyone. And so I just don't want, as intimidating as it seems, and I do very much understand that, but I don't want that to be the only reason that people just say no. And I guess the other caveat to that is that's a very easy decision to make for yourself, but convincing partners and children and parents of that is much harder.
Yeah.
That unfortunately, once you've decided you want to do it, then that's up to you. That's much harder to do.
Yeah. Any tips for that? I've had a few people pull out because of partners.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I get it. It's a much bigger ask for the family who are not used to that. It really is. So, no, I don't have any great answers of that one. I'm sure my mother would come on here and tell you all the things she wished I wouldn't do. So.
Yeah, okay. We better not interview her then.
She's been a good sport over the years, but she's not happy about it. So.
I know. I love that advice about going to Ukraine and thinking about the risk, because having been to Ukraine, to be honest, I think the thing I would be most likely to die of over there is dying in a car crash with the crazy driving. So
you die of boredom at the border going back into Poland,
and that too, yeah.
Or just have a coronary because everything is delicious.
Yeah,
it's so good.
You do an Elvis and die of overeating.
And I gain weight. It's all pork and potatoes, and it's all phenomenal.
Yeah. Oh, stop it! You're making me hungry. I guess along the other similar lines, is there sort of maybe in the bigger picture, is there anything that you could suggest that Australia and the global medical community could do to better support Ukrainian healthcare and patients?
I think honestly, one of the best things that we could potentially do is, and it sounds like that there are several places throughout the country that I've heard of now that are doing it, is to be open to hosting Ukrainian surgeons to come observe, because as they're now getting more time to do that, I think that's a much sort of higher yield way for them to sort of upskill.
Yeah.
Because again, Ukraine's starting from a pretty good position. They had quite a capable medical workforce before all this happened. So the people that are there are still very good. There's just not enough of them. Or, the ones who are sort of, just sort of finishing their training through these times, they may not have the same clinical skill set or clinical breadth of practice that they would have in sort of peacetime. And, certainly I know John Hunter, when I spoke to our chief of surgery, was very, very open to potentially having surgeons come here. I know a couple have gone down to Sydney. I think one has gone to Canberra, at least that I know of. And so I think that's going to be the next step. And hopefully as this conflict sort of winds down, of the next way of how any country, but Australia specifically for this audience, could really, really help in a very, very far-reaching way. Because, like you said, as that neurosurgeon who came here for a week, that's a very high-yield thing for them to be able to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good advice, and certainly agree with that. Having been involved with that neurosurgeon visit, he was here for about 2.5 weeks, and I was just talking to him 2 days ago, and just the huge impact it's had on his practice, on his morale, on the support he has now. It's just been life-changing for him and his patients. So yeah,
that's great. Yeah,
no, that's great. So Is there anything else that you can think of that, sort of non-medical people can do, to contribute or to make a difference?
I think certainly that would be an excellent place to contact like Rudy or some of the folks from CMA, because there's always a role for logistics and people who know how to coordinate and put people in contact with one another. There's always a need for that. And I think from the non-medical, beyond just certainly fundraising is one, but then determining how to put those to use.
Yeah.
And I think running it through something like the CMA, or one of those that has quite a good infrastructure for that, is probably a better way to do it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And yeah, just a reminder that our the charity that I run, Only Passing Through, partners with CMA. I'm actually on the board of CMA now, so if
Oh,
people
wow.
want an easy way to connect with Rudy or
There you go.
CMA, they can do that through me. So yeah. So are you planning to return to Ukraine again after everything we've said?
I am. Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and when and what are you hoping to achieve on your next visit?
We're going back in, we actually just confirmed the dates. It's in May, and so be going back there. Um, right now, looking like probably just Lviv again. Yeah, Kiev has been put through as a possibility. I just have to confirm with Dr. Galich, who's one of the guys that I worked with in Kiev before.
Yeah.
But it'll be one of those. And the Kiev thing, I'm hoping still to just sort of touch base with those two big pediatric patients that I was meant to work on this last visit, but I have not heard about any of them. So otherwise, it may be just sort of reestablishing both that pediatric as well as at the microsurgery facility in Kiev,
Yeah.
and then in Lviv, working at the Children's Hospital there as well as the Veterans Hospital,
Yeah.
that we've been working at there. So we've got the two surgeons who are pretty well trained up and kind of running the microvascular program there, and then there's at least one more that we're hopefully trying to get up to speed. So they'll have three basically full-time military microsurgeons in Lviv now, which would be pretty.
Wow, that's fantastic. Oh, that's great. So, if we sort of start to wind up here, is there any sort of last things you'd like to say to people who might be listening?
Boy, I don't know.
I mean, you've said a lot already. I probably haven't left
feel like we've
too
covered
much
it
to
pretty
say.
well. Yeah, no, I'm not sure I have anything really constructive to add at this point.
Well, let me say that it's, as someone who is working with CMA and other NGOs over there, and talking to Ukrainian health professionals, I know that the kind of work that you're doing is hugely appreciated. And as you said, your commitment is hugely appreciated. It means a lot to people over there. It's such a huge morale booster, and all the things you said, like, were just spot on. Getting more people to sponsor Ukrainian doctors to come over here and support them to do upskilling here would be wonderful. And if people who want to go over there to sort of consider, trying it out and real talking to you or me, or
Yeah, happy to. Yeah.
and just understanding that perhaps the risk isn't quite what they think, and that it's a very worthwhile experience. It's been really valuable talking to you tonight. And I want to say
great.
thank you so much for everything that you do. It's really wonderful, and I know it's greatly appreciated. It makes a big difference.
No,
Thank you.
that's great. Yeah. All right.